Well, the first thing I would like you to talk a little bit about is that we have now finished the first third part of the year, first 4 months, and I would like you to look back a little bit and see how things have gone for the company for Superunion from January to April, and how they look for the rest of the year, having in mind that there are, of course, certain challenging situations, most of all, and let's put aside for a moment the human tragedy of the war in Ukraine, but that has economic implications too. The COVID isn't yet finished. There's inflation in certain markets, supply chains, so certain things that are not making the situation easy. So how you look at it, looking back a little and looking forward?
Yeah, well, it's such a fascinating world in so many ways, isn't it? I mean, there are so many challenges in the world, and they're coming one after another and one on top of another, and yet somehow business is still remarkably good. And so we're in a very strong position. We've been in a strong position now through all of 2021 and continuing in a similar situation in 2022. And we keep looking at the world and saying it's very difficult to be very optimistic because of the macro issues that exist, and it isn't hard to see how they can have a negative impact on business. And yet, as we go forward, we're seeing strength in our business, strength in our clients, strength in the services that we offer, and the performance is good through that. So it is an interesting situation. So we've done very well, and that trend shows no sign of stopping. I wouldn't want to look ahead and say, well, of course that's going to continue and nothing's going to stop it. I think that would be wrong to do that. Mm-hmm. We have new forces coming into the world now through inflation pressures, pricing pressures, and what the macroeconomic impact of that will be, and how that translates into the economics of the businesses and the clients that we serve. We'll have to wait and see. But I must say, I think what business has shown itself to be, our business and a number of other businesses actually in this space, have shown themselves to be extremely resilient and extremely capable, despite the challenges that have come our way. So, a cautiously good outlook, I suppose. Of course, what we all worry about is we want the world to become a safer, healthier, more stable place. But if I just look at the outlook for Superunion, it's very positive.
Mm-hmm. Okay, certainly. And looking at the results and the comments done by Macred in this case, commenting on the WPP results, it's interesting to see that despite, as you said, all the difficulties and the situation that seems worrying in a way, clients are trying to, it seems, at least from the figures and from the comments, that companies and clients are trying to go ahead and to do business and to look forward and to go for growth and to do new things and to challenge the situation in a way.
Right. I think that's right. I think companies are somewhat forced and have been somewhat forced in the last 2 years or so to evaluate very carefully how they go forward. There's a lot of fundamental questions businesses have had to ask themselves about how they show up in the world, what they believe in, what they stand for, how they adapt to change, how they retain a talent and attract talent, how they have a point of view on issues that matter, and where they invest and where they don't invest. And all of those things are good for companies that operate in the marketing service space, because those are the kind of questions we help our clients to answer in one way or another. And it's a very, very multifaceted business, of course, marketing services, and particularly at the level of WPP. There are many, many ways in which we help solve those questions, but there are many of those questions. And I think that's a lot of what is behind that. The advantage that companies need in order to grow or succeed versus their competitors is more likely to come now from creative thinking, imagination, big ideas, and less likely to come from knowledge transfer and conventional consulting that just relies on techniques that everybody already knows and they're just being redeployed around the world. I think that trend was happening anyway, and I think what we've seen with the destabilizing effect of COVID, of Russia, Ukraine, and everything that ensues around that, I think that forces companies to think faster and harder about that. And yes, we are as Superunion and as WPP a partner to companies when they look to answer those kind of questions. So I think that is in part why our business is extremely strong. I think it's also strong, honestly, because we've done a better job of organizing ourselves to be able to serve our clients in better ways. So I think some of the growth we're seeing, we would be seeing anyway, and not everybody in the industry will be growing their business and increasing their share of it. But I do think that clients see value in the kind of services that we can provide now in ways that perhaps they might not have come to at the same pace before.
Okay. Well, now I would like you to think a little bit about your company, about Superunion. You've been at the head of it for a number of years. And I would like you to talk a little bit about what do you want to achieve yet for the company? Where is it, or when you want it to be in the future? Maybe we can talk a little bit about targets in the short term and targets in the long term. Something that perhaps you would like to be remembered with. Jim was the boss of this company. He did this and that and that. That was good. What would you like to do to achieve in the company?
Well, great questions. I mean, I would like the company to be famous for what it's done. I mean, not necessarily me, of course, although to the extent that might happen, I guess that's good. But I would always think of it through the lens of the company. Look, everybody is always on a journey, and I think we in this business we have to have a very good balance of pragmatism and living in the here and the now, and worrying about today and our clients today and the challenges today. But I think it is also very important that we have a vision and an ambition for ourselves in terms of how we move forward. When we created Superunion as a company and brought together 5 agencies that were working largely independently of each other, the vision was very much to be able to deliver creative excellence at scale for our clients. So to serve the biggest clients, help them solve the biggest challenges in the world today with more creativity, more imagination, bigger, better ideas. And that is a mission that will never end. And so I think if I look at where I want Superunion to be, it's let's keep doing that, but let's do more and more and more of it. We will never have exhausted all of the possibilities for how we can deliver that. There will always be more clients. There will always be more opportunities. I think it's hard to define goals like that in terms of specific clients and specific kinds of executions. Every challenge we solve is different, but I would like to see Superunion grow in its ability or in its position as the company that CEOs, CXOs, business leaders around the world go to when they say, I need to grow or transform or evolve my business. Who do I go to? The answer they have there, I would like that answer more often than not to be Superunion. 20 years ago, it might have been McKinsey. In the future, and to a large extent today, I think many of our clients and senior people and clients come to us and say, I need you to help me to transform, to change, to grow. And they see us as a first choice for that. So that's the goal, is to be able to assist clients and the biggest clients in the toughest challenges, and to do more of that. Along the way, there are lots of things that we can set as goal. We won a Grand Prix at Cannes last year. Things like that matter, actually, as measures of how we're doing, and that was a great moment. At that point, 3 years into the lifetime, 3.5 years in the lifetime of Superunion, to be winning a Grand Prix at Cannes is a lovely recognition. And I think being able to sustain the level of creative excellence that produces awards like that, whether or not you always win the awards is one thing, but whether or not you produce work of that quality consistently is the main thing in that. So I think that's very much the goal. With that comes growth as a company. We want to be a great place for people to work, and I'd love people to feel, more and more people to feel, that at some stage in their career, if they've had the opportunity to work at Superunion, that it was an influential and important and an enjoyable time for them in their career. So those are the ways that I think about it. It starts with great product and great creativity, and the commitment to sustain that and deliver that is important for us to keep going with. And actually, in order to do that, you've slightly never got to be too satisfied with where you are. If we ever get to a point where we think, well, we've achieved what we set out to do, then I think that would be dangerous for us. So, expect us to grow, expect us to evolve, expect us to think in the future about how we can add more value to our clients through different services, through wider capabilities, through broader geographies. Those things are all important and valuable in pursuit of that aim to solve the biggest problems through creativity.
There's something interesting that you have mentioned, that now the clients are looking to Superunion for certain questions, or certain problems, or certain issues that they have. 20 years ago, they were looking at McKinsey. It's quite a journey, actually.
Well, it is, but as I've mentioned this earlier on, 20 years ago, we lived in really what was a knowledge economy, where advantage was gained by transferring knowledge from an industry or a geography to another industry or another geography, and it was about smart thinking that was quite linear in nature, but it was really, really valuable to clients to be able to engage with someone who could say, there's a way of doing this that you don't know and I do. And that was the way that the old management consulting model worked and built. And as I say, it was extremely valuable to clients, and it was the easiest, fastest way to success. And you bought that knowledge. What's happened, I think, in the last 10 years, and it continues to accelerate, is that all that knowledge has already been traded to a large extent. So that knowledge has been distributed quite evenly around the world these days. So large organizations know how to re-engineer themselves based on best practice and principles. What they don't know is how can they distinguish themselves or differentiate themselves from their competitors more powerfully? How can they connect more powerfully with their audiences, which are not just consumers, but also their talent that they need to attract, their shareholders, their investors, their regulators, other people there. So these are different kind of questions to which there are different kind of solutions. So those solutions are more about how you bring creative intelligence to the table instead of knowledge. So I would maintain we've moved from the knowledge economy to the creative economy. And the creative economy is more about rethinking what's possible. And that, in my experience, is what CEOs spend their time worrying about. They don't really spend their time worrying about, well, how do I organize my team and my structure and my supply chains and this, that, and the other. They have teams of people that do that. What CEOs are thinking about is, I am accountable for how my business delivers differentiation in my market versus my peers. And the measure of that is very often the share price, and increasingly, whilst share price is measured in terms of short-term financials, it's increasingly measured in terms of long-term strategic differentiation. So that's where we see the opportunity. That's where we see the sweet spot for a business like Superunion, and that's exciting.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, much has been said along these almost 2.5 years since the pandemic started about how companies have rethought or about or are looking at many things in different ways and trying to change them, whether it's themselves, their own way of working, the relationship with their workforce, of course, the relationship with consumers, many things. It has been the same. The same has happened towards the brands and brand management, which is let's say the core business of Superunion. There's been a change of attitude, new ways of thinking, new ways of looking at this so very important part of the company as such, which is the brand.
Yes. So the question is, what are the changes that are coming from as a result of COVID and the last 2.5 years?
This rethinking of, in a way, there's been a rethinking of life in general, in a way, about societies, about our, and how the companies are dealing, if they are dealing in a new way with the way they manage.
How are they responding to it? Well, so I think there are two things there. I mean, I wrote very early on at the start of the pandemic, I wrote a piece that said, now is not the time to be writing pieces about here's 10 things we've learned from COVID, and which a lot of people were already starting to do, and I'm still slightly of the opinion that it's still too early to be looking and saying what have we learned from COVID and what's changed from COVID, because I think the reality of the last 2 years is it has been a time of incredibly fast-paced change, quite reactive a lot of the time, working out how to cope in new environments and adjust to new realities. So I think some of the activity that's been around in through this period is that it's quite tactical and important to solve, but tactical. But I do think now we have seen some interesting things emerge, and there's a couple of things that I think are interesting at a sort of macro level here. I mean, one is just how fast we all realized that certain technologies that we thought wouldn't work and be useful actually really were. The ability to communicate and conduct meetings like this through digital platforms instead of in person, the way to connect people around the world. And what that led to, I think, is more frequent and better quality discussion inside of organizations and around organizations. And I think what that leads to is more thinking and more discussion and more innovation and more possibility. And I think that's really interesting. And then that starts to open up questions about who are we in the world? How do we show up? And then that links back to the question of context. So in a world that is affected by COVID, where there is so much suffering and so much hardship and so much change, how do we as a company want to operate and go to market and show up in the world in that context? So there have been a lot more big questions, I think, that have been asked. And some of it as well is because when you're forced to go through major change, which many organizations were just because of the sheer economics and operational realities of COVID, when you're forced to do that, then it's also an opportunity to say, well, if we have to rethink everything, then we might as well rethink everything. Not just some bits of everything, but everything of everything. And so I think we have seen a lot of more fundamental thinking and a lot more communication and a lot more dialogue. And I think those generally, I think, have been good things. But I still think we've been through a rapid period of adjustment. As when we started this conversation, we were saying it's still happening. It's not over. We don't know, and there are other issues layering in on top of just COVID now. So I think we're still in a time of flux. For the most part, I think companies have responded very well. For the most part, I think companies have responded well, and they've become responsible entities, which most companies were already to some extent. It perhaps just not able to prioritize it or make it as visible and obvious as they do now. And those are good. Those are good things. Those are good discussions for businesses to be had. When we get to a more stable era, and that might be a year, it might be 2 years, it might be 5 years. We just don't know. When we do, I think companies are going to be poised for a really exciting time, and many companies are going to be in great shape actually to drive growth and innovation and new experiences, because all of the groundwork has now been done there to make that possible.
Okay. And for you personally, as a CEO of multinational company who has employees all over the world, what has been, how have you gone through the experience? What has been the learnings? How do you feel now, looking back these 2 years?
Well, it's been a very long 2 years, hasn't it? I mean, one can't help but it's quite hard to reflect on, I suppose, in some ways. There's some things I think of it. One thing that's amazed me through all of this is just how much the whole world has been largely in harmony in many ways at different points in time. I mean, the cycle of people's mood, even in different parts of the world, was simultaneously the same. If people were feeling more positive in China, they were feeling more positive in Brazil, and if they were feeling more negative in New York, they were also feeling more negative in Bangkok, for example. And so I think the humanity in all of our business and among all of our people was a really important thing. And I went from some of my connection with our people in markets would be, some phone calls that we would do on, maybe a fortnightly or even a monthly basis. And then I'd wait for 2 or 3 months, and then I'd make a trip somewhere, and then I would talk to the staff. During COVID, we started having weekly calls, sometimes more than one weekly call, with key people in the markets, and then frequent town halls with all staff where everybody comes together, and we can do those just from sitting in a room or in a studio, and we recently held one in the metaverse for people. And I think that learning that the more we connect with people and the more we bring people together, I think that the better we are, and not just in terms of business, but the better that is for all of us as human beings. And so I think a lot of humanity has come from this, and I think interesting. I mean, I wonder whether the global response of society to the Russia-Ukraine conflict would have been the same if it hadn't been for our learnings from COVID about the importance of being strong, morally sensitive human beings. I think that's something that's interesting, that's just occurred to me as we speak here. So I think that's been one thing. Another learning for me is just the importance of us having vision in our business and strong communication and goals in our business, because business, just to some extent, people's jobs have been the one stable thing through all this time, while people have been locked down at home, and maybe kids not in school and not able to live life from a social perspective in the way people are used to. At least jobs have been stable, but the more we make our place of work and the things we believe in as a company an important part of how we communicate with people, I think that's been positive too. So lots of things. It just has been an extraordinary time that most of us, and I've been working for a good long time now. I think I got my first job when I was 13, working in a paper shop. So it's been a good long while, and we've never in our careers seen anything like this. Mm-hmm. Other generations have. I mean, it's not unique in history, but we've never seen anything like this, and it's been extraordinary. But yeah, the resilience of human beings and our humanity has been the most important learning for me.
Okay, thank you. Well, you mentioned your first job. Perhaps that will be more interesting you to talk about than then the things I'm going to ask you. Well, before you entered the brand consultancy field, you worked in the client side or in the corporate side into well-known companies. Two questions around that. Well, what things that you learned then are still useful to you? Do you think that are still relevant for your job today? And the second one is how came that you went from one side to the other, to being in a company, to go to brand consultancy?
Yeah. Most people do it the other way round, don't they? What did I learn? First of all, I mean, like, I had the very good fortune to work for some amazing companies, and they were great brands. So I worked for companies like Levi Strauss, Converse, Pepe Jeans back in the day, when that was a great brand in its, quite early in its lifestyle. And in all of those places, they were brands that were just lived and breathed and built and grown like every day through the actions of everybody that worked for their company. So I've never taken any kind of a class in brand building or marketing, because that was my university for learning, being in those environments. And they were cool places. I mean, we didn't build those brands because we sat down and talked about strategy. We built those brands by executing fast and constantly and in innovative and exciting ways. And I'm a strategist, so I'm not for 1 minute saying we don't need strategy, but I think one of the things they taught me was just the importance of delivery in order to realize a strategy. The other thing they taught me is that the way that organizations work and companies like that work is completely different to the way that agencies work, and understanding the way that they work is really valuable when you're on the agency side. Understanding that the person you're speaking to at the client side, and let's say that person is the CMO, that person's responsibilities and that person's concerns inside of that business are way bigger and way broader than just what we're doing for them. And understanding the commercial pressures that exist in an organization. And we have commercial pressures in the agency world because our business model is one thing, but they're completely different, and not necessarily less or greater, but they're completely different commercial pressures in an organization, say, that sells a product, and its business model relies on the more product it sells, the more profit it makes, as opposed to us, which is just, in effect, selling the capabilities of people on some form of time-based model. So understanding the way the organizations work is also a valuable part of it. But I think fundamentally it's understanding that brands are built through a huge multitude of actions, deliverables, and by the way, one of the big failings in the agency world is we don't really get involved with product at all. And yet when you're in a lot of organizations, certainly organizations where there is a physical product, that is your brand. And everything else is in support of that to some extent. So I still try to retain as much of those experiences and insights as I possibly can. In terms of how I got into it, I was at a point in my career where I was running product and marketing for Europe, Middle East, Africa for Converse, which is a great brand. This is before Converse was owned by Nike. And I think it's gone on to become an even greater brand in many ways. Subsequently, but it was a great company and a great job and an absolutely amazing brand with a fantastic history and a very diverse set of opportunities, actually, even around Europe. In parts of Europe in which it was very much a basketball brand, or parts of Europe in it was very much a lifestyle brand, with strong associations into the music industry, for example. Parts of Europe where it was very much an action sports, skateboard and so forth brand, and amazing company in many ways. The thing I observed at the time, though, that I was spending all of my time running the business and less of my time really working on what I loved, which was generating ideas and the creativity, and that was coming from the agencies not so much from inside of my business. And as happy as I was to be leading the client side of that and being the person that the agencies would come to and say, well, here's a great idea that we've got, there was something in my heart that was saying, yeah, but I want to be generating the ideas. I don't want to be receiving the ideas. I want to be part of that team that's generating the ideas. So that was, I got it into my head that that's what I wanted to do. And then I spent about a year trying to find an agency that would hire me. And I couldn't find one because at that point in time, I was, I had no skills really that an agency needed. I wasn't trained in account management. I wasn't trained in creative. I wasn't trained in strategy, and certainly not in an agency way. So agencies would be like, oh no, that's great. It's really interesting that you've got this background, but we wouldn't take you on, certainly not at your level. And then I found an agency that said, actually, you know what, I think there could be something interesting here. Let's hire you as a brand strategist. So I joined an agency inside of WPP. I'd just been acquired by WPP 21 years ago. And the rest is history. And if I'm honest with you, the first 6 months I was thinking, am I going to fit into this world? Is this really my world? And here I am 21 years later in effect in the same company. I mean, it's one of the companies that went on to create Superunion. So a lot has added to it as time has gone by. But it's been a great journey. I would still say to you, I'm kind of a strategist really, but I'm kind of a creative too, and I'm kind of a client person. I still resist the agency desire to put people into a box in that respect. Yeah. But yeah, I joined on a whim really, and I think that I was hired on a whim, and I'm still here.
Okay, 21 years later. Okay, that's good. Well, you've mentioned several times in your words the precisely the word agency, which is perhaps more associated with advertising, whereas branding is more associated with consultancies. Why this difference? Why this difference in the wording of it?
Yeah, well, I think far too much time gets lost actually debating a question like that inside of the agency or consultancy world. If I'm honest with you, yeah, I know, but
it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question.
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I'll tell you why I think it is. I mean, I think it's historical actually. I mean, I think the amazing kind of Mad Men era of the advertising agency was incredibly exciting and valuable and glamorous in many ways, right? I mean, whether it actually was every day is another question one could discuss, but in theory it was very glamorous. And so, the idea of an advertising agency became embedded, and whether or not agency was the right word or the wrong word, probably stopped to matter at a certain point. So, advertising agencies were advertising agencies because that worked and that was cool. I think what happened with businesses more focused on brand is most evolved from being design businesses, and design businesses always to some extent had a slight inferiority complex, a slight worry that they weren't taken seriously enough, and the evolution I think into brand consultancies was very interesting. You had design businesses that were maybe at their inception more focused on craft and execution. But the minute that corporate identity started to become a major source of advantage for companies in the world, and we're probably talking in the 90s primarily, around that era where design companies started to design corporate identities, they very quickly realized that you can't design a good corporate identity unless you understand the strategy of the business that you're designing for. So design companies went through this phase of hiring in strategists and smart people who could understand more of a kind of corporate strategy narrative and help to shape that. And the really good ones were also able to translate that into creative ideas and strong creative briefs. And at that point, the design businesses were saying to themselves, well, now we need to be known as something more than a design business, because were something more than design. And that's why they started calling themselves brand consultancies, because it sounded like it was grown up and serious, and you didn't have to worry so much perhaps about whether people thought you were a graphic design business and more downstream. So I suppose that was the origin of it. I mean, I think as time has gone on, those terms become less and less relevant. I mean, by the way, I think there's nothing more important in the world right now than the broad, wide concept of design. And I think for as a narrative around, as I was having a conversation with my good friend Rory Sutherland recently, and he was telling me with a quote from a Herbert Simon that goes something along the lines of, everything that isn't defined by science is a matter of design. And actually, if you think about the way that organizations shape themselves in the world and experiences are shaped in the world, that what they are is about design. And in some ways, perhaps we're ready for a time where we go back to celebrating the word design and being less worried about the word brand, which everybody uses, and the word consultancy, which everybody uses. So while it is a great question, because while on the one hand I start off by saying perhaps we spend too much time discussing it, on the other hand I think it probably does indicate, that there's some interesting opportunity in the narrative that sits underneath that. And I'm less worried about what words we use to describe the business we're in, but I'm certainly very interested in how we create a narrative that really resonates with clients and best represents the value that we can bring to the world.
Okay, thank you. Let's use one word of another, but it seems, at least from outside, that advertising agencies and brand consultancies live in parallel worlds. There's not much crossing or contamination between them or working together, and even there's something of a little bit of jealousy or whatever. Is that for real? Or should it change or not? How do you see it?
I think it's a fascinating question, because I wouldn't say it's a situation that I necessarily recognize. I suppose I could imagine that some people could feel that, but no, I don't think it's that. I don't think that's the reality at all. Actually, I think in truth there are many great people working together really constructively and collaboratively across all the disciplines. I mean, you won't find an agency in the world these days really that'll describe itself as an advertising agency anyway. I mean, advertising has moved on so much, and companies that produce advertising also do a lot of great work in a lot of great areas. And a company like Superunion also produces advertising for a number of clients. So I think anyway, the view that says, well, there are advertising agencies and there are brand consultancies and they're different animals, that era is long gone. And there's a lot more similarity, but also a lot more opportunity to collaborate. And we are collaborating all the time with other agencies that have different skill sets or complementary skill sets to those that we do. And that's really important. I mean, for our clients, that's really important. The last thing clients want is to have to manage two groups of agencies or consultancies, whatever they're calling themselves, who won't get on with each other. I mean, that is a recipe to get fired if you're in business. We have to collaborate, and it's not because not because we're told to, but because it's good. It's good for business. It's good for creativity. It's good for our clients, and it's good for the people. So I don't really recognize it as something that happens in my business. If I'm honest with you, if it were to, I wouldn't be happy with it. And I don't think any agency leader, and certainly not any group company leader, would have any time whatsoever for anybody that wanted to create any form of barrier between the ability to work together. So yeah, maybe it was so in the past, but definitely not. Definitely not in the future. I do think there are different approaches. I mean, I maintain. I feel that if you give a problem to a brand consultancy to solve, the brand consultancy will start by looking at what is unique about the company or the organization or the brand, and how do we project out from that. And I think what's great about a lot of agencies that have their base more in communications is that they very often start by saying, what do we know about the audience and what will they receive well as a message? How can we connect better to them? And those are two different ways to solve a problem, and they're both great ways to solve it. Actually, sometimes you do need to start by understanding the organization and what makes it unique, and sometimes you do need to start by understanding the audience and what they need to know. So for that reason, collaboration is hugely important and hugely valuable.
Okay, there's also the perception that the work with brands being usually more long-term projects and more fundamental to the, in some ways to the core of the company, are more recession or crisis resistant that advertising that maybe has a little more tactical bias. Is that true? Is it do brand work is more resilient when the times are not so good?
I think it's the other way around. Actually, I would say. I mean, brand work is largely project driven. We have to have a problem to solve. I mean, you don't. I mean, there's a lot of work we do that is ongoing relation. Many of our relationships with clients are 10, 15, 20 years old, but a lot of what we do is project driven. It is because there's a moment in time where an organization is going through some form of change or needs to pivot somehow or needs to adjust, and then they make an investment in brand. And those investments quite often are things that are not recurring items on their P&L. So they don't have a budget somewhere for marketing where they say, oh yes, and we know we're going to spend X number of euro on relooking at our brand in some way, shape or form. Whereas in communications, very often that is the case. Very often, there may be some reduction in spend there, but the relationships continue. Where in our world, I mean, certainly when COVID first hit, the challenge was people just stopped spending on new projects that were discretionary. Now that came back very quickly, and as we discussed earlier on, some of the questions that were then raised were very fundamental and important questions. So no, I don't think brand related. I don't think brand agencies are more resilient. In fact, I would say we're stronger early indicators of trend in the market. We don't necessarily stay high or stay low for longer, but we're good early indicators of the health of the market. If the brand business is doing well, the marketing services business is probably going to be doing well in the coming months. If it's doing less well, then there may be some value in looking at why that might be.
Okay. And what about you in a way mentioned it before when you were looking at an historical view about the evolution of this type of companies. There's been sometimes it's said that brand work is overcomplicated and over intellectualized without necessity. Is that a fair accusation sometimes?
It depends who you've been talking to, I suppose. I mean, look, I mean, to answer that question, you could only answer that question in the specifics of who said it about what, right? So is it possible that that's been the case on some brand projects? I'm sure it's possible. I don't think it's in any way fair as a generalization, no. As I said earlier on, I mean, I think the nature of how one examines a brand and its opportunity and makes an action plan for it going forward is complex, and brands are complex in so much as there are many, many experiences and touch points that shape them. And it's not just about how they show up at retail or online or through brand identity or on pack or something like that. It's about every aspect of the brand's decision making. It's about the structure of the company. It's about its relationship with shareholders. It's about its talent brand. It's about its sense of purpose in the world, and importantly, how much it delivers on that. It's about what journalists choose to write about it when they haven't been given a press release or anything to work on, right? It's about what they undertake as sponsorships or associations. It's about many, many things. So that defining a strategy for a brand is complex, is inevitable, or involved. Let's say it has to be involved. There's a lot to do. The best solutions are always simple. I mean, it's the principle of Occam's razor. In the face of complex problem, the simplest solution is usually the best one, and that is true in brands as well. I mean, nobody wants a brand solution that takes 100 slides of PowerPoint to explain. And I do think there's a challenge on us to codify our work for brands in ways that allows it to be delivered simply. And perhaps some solutions in the past from some people have not delivered on that as well as they might. But no, I would certainly reject the idea that brand consultancy is too complicated. I think the Albert Einstein quote is, everything has to be as simple as possible, but not too simple. So I guess that's what we have to aspire to, and not too simple is the thing we have to really be smart about defining.
Okay. Well, now let's talk, if you like, about two words that are my words at the moment. One is purpose, brand or corporate purpose, which is I have the impression that perhaps it has been very important, in part because of the pandemic, but has put corporations in a position related to society which has been quite unique. But it seems to me that there's too much talk and not too much sense, in a way. That perhaps there's time to regroup and think again about this thing and to look at it in a slightly different way. How do you see?
Yes, I think it's a great question, and I think we have to separate out in thinking about purpose. We have to separate out the value and the role of purpose, which continues to be hugely important, in my opinion. And then that's number one. Then number two, the conversation around purpose that I think, but the role of brand purpose isn't really to engage an industry or the media in debate about whether the words are right or wrong, or whether purpose is right or wrong, right? But so I think the conversation around purpose has become too general and too unfocused, actually. But the third thing for me, the real value of brand purpose, is in what it actually means for how an organization behaves. And when you have a really strong sense of who you are as an organization and how you want to show up in the world, and when you deliver consistently well against that, that is a powerful thing. And that is something that I think has to be protected and emphasized and delivered at ever greater scale inside of organizations. So in that sense, I think brand purpose is hugely important. But I do think, yes, the discussion around it is at times distracting almost from that. I will also say, I mean, brand purpose serves a lot of masters. A huge amount of it is internal. A huge amount of it is internal, because if, as an organization, you can attract and retain and motivate your teams in a powerful way, you will, to some extent, automatically deliver better to the world. And people who are looking to work in organizations today increasingly demand that. They want to be working somewhere where they're going to be delivering something of value to the world. And so purpose in many ways serves that. I mean, that's where the external debate about purpose sometimes goes astray, because it ignores that. It ignores the value of aligning people, motivating people. Every organization I've ever worked with has plenty of debate about its purpose internally. I mean, whatever people are saying on the outside, it's not that everybody sits there on the inside going, oh yeah, no, everything's great. You know, everybody debates their purpose. The debate is important, but as I say, it matters less that external commentators want to comment on, do they like the words, or do they feel that it's been executed consistently or inconsistently? But it really matters that organizations have it and deliver against it well. My personal view is I think purpose needs to be aligned with vision inside of a company, and vision needs to be very specific around, this is what we aim to achieve, this is how we're going to achieve it, these are the practical, measurable outcomes that we're working towards. And if you have that aligned to purpose, then I think it works really powerfully. If the purpose is too much about, I mean, most companies' brand purpose ultimately comes down to, you know, working hard to make the world a better place. I mean, it's very hard in a very large organization to create purpose that has much more specificity than that. You can do it, and we do it all the time, and there's lots of nuance to it. But that's where I think vision comes into play, because the real question is how. What does that mean? What are we going to deliver? And it doesn't have to be delivered next month or next year. It could be a 10-year vision. It could be, you know, a moonshot type of approach. But I think when you get that right, it is really, really important. But I do think you ask a great question, which is, the conversation has gone astray, but purpose itself is hugely important.
Okay. And the second word is, you've been talking a moment ago about the complexity of the brand work, and because the brand lives in many worlds and in many spaces and in many levels. And there's another one now, which is metaverse, which there's also a lot of conversation, but I'm in no doubt that it has some very interesting points. And I would like you to talk a little bit. How do you see it? Are clients interested in it? What's the attractive points of it for brand work and for brands?
Yeah. Well, I do think it's important. I mean, by the way, I think it's an amazing piece of branding, because metaverse, just everybody wants to know what the metaverse is before anyone's even investigated what the metaverse is. And, you know, like the entire world is aware of the metaverse, but a much smaller percentage could actually give you any kind of definition of it, right? So lovely. One of those.
I think that's going to be the title of the interview. The metaverse is a wonderful piece of branding. That's great.
It is, well, it is in that way, because but you know, and that's what a great piece of branding does, right? Is it opens up a level of inquiry and interest, and then it's up to people to go and experience it. And by the way, that's the difference between branding and brand building, right? The branding is the naming and identity piece, but brand building is when you get into the experience, does it deliver on that promise? So if we move into that from the metaverse point of view, you know, I mean, its promise is of the future, right? I mean, metaverse experiences today are interesting and can be enjoyable, but it's a nascent technology. It's a new technology, and we're not yet at the point where I think we're I don't think anybody would claim right now that there is a transformational business opportunity today in the metaverse. However, I do believe there is a transformational business opportunity in the future. in the metaverse. And I say just thinking about it, I mean, just the opportunity. There's a really interesting thing for me in the metaverse is the blend of the physical and the real world, the physical and the virtual world. So we're used to virtual worlds. We're perfectly cool with going into a virtual world and being in a virtual world. What we're not used to is being in a virtual world that behaves like the real world, where you can go in and actually talk to people who are other real people, not avatars or characters or somehow fictionalized. You can go in, you can be in an environment and do something that will have meaning in your life, as opposed to doing something that is abstract and when you finished is gone. And to me, that's where the metaverse gets really interesting, that the blend of real world needs that can be served through a virtual world. So, at retail, for example, being able to go and try something on or put two things next to each other and compare them, to have a conversation with someone about how it serves your need better. So instead of having to go through an online shopping experience where you can't really see too much about what you're buying or physically go to a shop, the metaverse will offer you the opportunity to be able to combine those experiences. And it's things like that that are interesting. More human interaction, I think, is going to be more interesting. Just human experiences, being able to do something that will be fulfilling and useful to people. And let's remember that many people in the world don't have the opportunity to do all of the things that perhaps they'd like to, and possibly, if the connectivity is there and the hardware allows it in the future, they will be able to do more of that. So the way I look at it, it's rather like smartphones. I mean, when the smartphone started to be introduced, a lot of people weren't really sure why we needed smartphones, and now no one can imagine a world without smartphones. So I do believe that the metaverse offers a lot of opportunity. I mean, right now, a lot of metaverse experience, a lot of people will have a metaverse experience that they probably won't enjoy, because not all of them are great. I think the key there is to stick with it. The key for brands is get in there, experiment, use it, trial it, look for value in there. Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it, because you don't want to be left behind. But there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work still to do on it. But it's a good thing. Our clients are asking us, what can we do in the metaverse? What does the metaverse mean to us? And those are great questions to be asking right now.
Okay. Well, perhaps mine are not so great, but there are two left. First one is, I would like you to mention 2 or 3 or whatever you want, brands that you like it very much because the branding and brand building work they've done over the years. Some personal favorites for you, preferably not Superunion clients.
Yeah,
brands that you love.
I'm going to work really hard not to give you. Well,
give me. Of course, mention what you please. Of course.
No. I will respect the question, because I understand that it's harder to believe me if I give you clients of ours. Well, as we've talked about earlier on, I used to say I always used to say the first half of my career, but actually it's much more like the first third of my career these days. So I spent the first part of my career anyway working in some great brands that I love very much. But I'm still very much an admirer of fashion, sportswear, streetwear brands. I love them. I think brands like Nike and Adidas are just amazing the way they run themselves as brands, and they get a lot of credit, but I'm not sure they get enough credit sometimes for how well managed those brands are. I mean, those brands are old brands. I mean, there's so few brands that have stayed at the top of their industry from 1970 all the way through to the 2020s, and have reinvented themselves in so many ways, and so many things that they've done ahead of everybody. Collaborations. I mean, Adidas have been amazing at that. Adidas were collaborating with Yohei Yamamoto on Y3 before anyone had thought about collaborations really in brands, and now they have a whole suite of people, from designers and celebrities and musicians and so forth. And so I think they're great brands, and they've firmly positioned themselves at the heart of culture. That so that they've really found so many ways to transcend just being a company selling a product. So I'm a great fan of those brands in those space. So I'll put them up as my example. And sort of spilling on from that, I love brands that have kind of highly technical specs to them. There's some great apparel brands. There's a brand called Jotner that creates mountain wear and jackets and waterproofs and so forth. And I love their story. There's a brand called Volleybach who produce extreme technical products with some amazing capabilities inside of them. Some of them you can conduct electricity and have antiviral protection inside of them. So I love that. I'm a real sucker for a piece of technical performance wear. Again, because it's just, if you're going to build a brand without a great product, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Great answer. Thank you very much, Jim. Well, and now just to finish, another this has been kind of recommendation of brands, and now I'm asking you for a recommendation of something to read or something to see, a book, a film, a series, whatever, something that you would like to recommend to our readers and viewers. Not need to be professional, something that you have enjoyed or like it, and you would like to share with us.
Yeah, great. I have to think hard about that, because I'm one of the world's worst read people. I don't spend so much time. I certainly don't read very many business books. But I tell you one that I love, and I love the concepts behind it. So there's a chap called David Chalmers, who's a philosopher. I think he describes himself as a techno philosopher. He's written a book called Reality Plus. And the question he asks in the book is, can life in a virtual world be as real and meaningful as life in a physical world? So it goes into those questions of the metaverse that we started to explore. It touches on the great philosophers and thinkers from Plato and Einstein. It asks questions about whether we may already be living in some form of technological simulation anyway and just not know it. It's mind-blowingly good. It just makes you think differently about the role and the value of technology in our lives, and effectively why we shouldn't be scared of it in many ways, is my outtake. And it's brilliantly simple. Like all philosophers, what I love about philosophers is that their task is to convey their ideas as simply and succinctly as possible. So whereas a lot of other essayists like to actually make their ideas as long and complicated as possible, to make it look smart, but he explains things really simply. And I love that. And it appeals to the marketer in me. It appeals to the creative in me. It also appeals to the scientist in me. I have a degree in physics from my university days, which I still think is useful. I also, by the way, subscribe to New Scientist magazine, that I always think is very interesting, because, as we mentioned earlier on to some extent, I think very often creativity starts where science stops. So if you know what's scientifically true in the world, then you can identify the boundaries and the starting point for your creativity in some ways. So anyway, yes, that would be. But Reality Plus by David Chalmers is a great read.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim. Thank you very much for the recommendations and for your answers and for your time. It's been a real pleasure.